Hi blokes, it's Bruce Robinson here again from the Fathering Project, and we're continuing our discussion on discipline. And today I want to talk about negotiating rules. And last week we mentioned this idea that you shouldn't be a military dictator. I think in the old days, dads were probably a bit like that. They were more authoritarian. Maybe they grew up in military situations. And so just telling kids what to do worked. That's what they expected. But nowadays, kids do expect to be part of the negotiation, and honestly, it's a better way to do it. It's a win-win. I remember my old footy coaches, some of the old generation, they used to say things like, "I want you guys, you see that brick wall? I want you to run through that brick wall. If I tell you to run through that brick wall, I expect you to run through that brick wall." But the young blokes used to say, "Well, that's a bit silly, why don't you just run around it?" I think kids are like that. They expect to be involved in negotiation. And it's a great idea because they learn then how to negotiate. And often, apparently, kids sometimes, when you're talking about consequences, if they disobey the rules, can actually make the consequences a bit harsher than you might have. So it's a kind of an interesting process. A great skill and a great way for rules to be instituted and effected in a family. Now, the right time to make those rules with kids is probably at a family meeting, and we've discussed a few times already, and you can go back and look on the Fathering Project website for discussions about family meetings. But it's much better to discuss the rules in advance rather than kind of when you're really angry and you're unloading on them. And I think I mentioned before that we used to do this. For us, this is what worked for us, was a Sunday morning family breakfast. Everyone would get a say, no one could interrupt. We'd discuss all sorts of things and write it in a book. And that was a much better kind of atmosphere to talk about rules rather than when you're angry. Anyway, here's 4 tips from the Fathering Project on how to negotiate rules with your kids. So the first rule is to be firm, fair and consistent in applying agreements and consequences once you have all established those agreements. The second rule is to negotiate more agreements according to the age of each child. As they get older, for example, into teenage life, the rules can be renegotiated and become more complex. The third rule is to ask teenagers to suggest appropriate consequences and then discuss them. What's the impact of withdrawal of privileges or timeouts or pocket money? Let them initiate them. The fourth rule is, if they break an agreement, calmly remind them of the agreement you made and why you have to stick with it. Sticking with the rules, as a dad who loves their kids, can be hard. And I remember once, honestly, I had a very strict rule with the 2 boys about something, and they broke the rule. They got together and broke this rule, and I can't quite remember what it was. What I do remember is going in and telling them both that we had to stick with the consequences. And they looked a bit sad. I mean, it wasn't a big deal, but I had to stick with the consequences and be consistent. So they were just young, really young, and they looked sad, and I said, "Well, I've got to stick with it, guys. Sorry, I'd be a bad dad if I didn't." Then they both started to cry, and then I started to cry because I didn't want to do it, but I said, "Guys, I've got to do it." Anyway, it was pretty soft discipline, but I thought, you just got to stick with it. Just one final comment about negotiating rules and agreements with your kids. The first is they work better. You get a win-win out of it, so it works better rather than being that military dictator where they kick against you. But the second thing is your kids then develop negotiation skills, really important in a workplace, to learn how to negotiate and generate a win-win for other people. Blokes, thanks for listening again about the negotiation of rules in the context of discipline. And next week's the final week in this set, and we're going to talk about that really difficult thing of how you give your kids independence. Really difficult. Talk to you next week.